in a deadly drone attack. It's also vowing to retaliate without undermining talks to get hostages out of Gaza. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more. The White House on Wednesday formally blamed a group called Islamic Resistance in Iraq for the Sunday drone attack in Jordan that killed 3 U.S. service members and injured at least 40. Here's what the White House said. Watch.
We believe that the attack in Jordan was planned, resourced, and facilitated by an umbrella group called the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, which contains multiple groups, including Kataib Hezbollah.
But the White House added that this was not the only group responsible for the many attacks on U.S. forces that have been happening in the Middle East throughout the past few months. And President Biden on Tuesday said he had decided on how to respond to the latest drone attack, but wouldn't go into details. The White House on Wednesday saying that there will be multiple phases to the U.S. counterattack, while adding that this should not impact any ongoing talks to get a hostage deal from Gaza. And this Friday, President Biden will attend a dignified transfer at Dover Air Force Base to mark the return of fallen U.S. troops to American soil. The White House on Wednesday also announced a new trip for President Biden sometime in February, and that is a long-awaited trip to East Palestine. And President Biden promised to go there about 1 year ago after the train derailment incident there causing chemical spill in the region. Here's what the White House said when questioned, why now?
We got an invitation from the mayor and community leaders to come, and very, very recently around. He always said that when the time was right, it was the most helpful for him to be there.
Former President Trump, who visited the region soon after the incident, said on Wednesday that Biden's trip is a year too late and is only to develop some political credibility. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News. Israel Defense Forces remain engaged in an intensive campaign across the Gaza Strip, reporting significant developments in northern and central Gaza. Amid the gun battles, Palestinian medics are risking their lives to care for the wounded near the front lines. NTD's Jason Perry has the latest on the war.
Israel Defense Forces continue to battle their way through the Gaza Strip. On Wednesday, the IDF reported killing 15 terrorists in the northern Gaza Strip in just 24 hours. And in central Gaza, the IDF killed 10 armed terrorists in less than an hour. And in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, the Hamas-run health ministry said over 150 people have been killed in the last 24 hours. Palestinian medics are now risking their lives as they move their ambulances to the front lines to be ready to care for the wounded.
We now function as an ambulance field point in central Khan Yunis. Since we left 6 days ago, we have been working. There's a lot of injuries among the displaced who are in the industrial quarter in some schools.
South Africa's foreign minister has taken note of the recent death toll and called for states to stop funding Israel's military. Her comments come just days after the World Court ordered Israel to take steps to prevent genocide in its war against Hamas terrorists.
I can't be dishonest. I believe that the...
What about China's genocide? What do you got to say about that?
People have been killed in the last 3-4 days, and clearly Israel believes it has license to do as it wishes.
The World Court also ordered Israel to take steps to improve the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Wednesday addressed these concerns.
South Africa had the temerity to bring us to the ICJ, charging us with genocide against, really in the service of a genocidal organization. Now, the worst thing that I can say is this, that many of the charges, false and unfounded, that were leveled against us in The Hague were brought by UNRWA officials. And we have discovered in the last few weeks that UNRWA officials were complicit in the massacre.
Netanyahu then called for other United Nations agencies to replace UNRWA to help solve the humanitarian aid situation in the Gaza Strip. And regarding the 136 hostages still being held captive in the Gaza Strip, National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said the discussions to release the hostages have been productive. Kirby also said that Secretary of State Antony Blinken will be heading back to the Middle East at the end of this week to continue the negotiations to release the hostages. Jason Berry, NTD News.
You know all the illegal aliens that are coming into the country? Guess who's paying for that, ladies and gentlemen? You are. Your tax dollars are being spent to bring illegal aliens into the United States. And in Chicago, they get $900 a month. I guarantee you, $9,000 a month. Excuse me. $9,000 a month. I guarantee you they're getting the same amount in New York. And it is being given out by our federal government, the State Department, and Mayorkas. He is involved in this. Joe Biden is involved in this. They don't want to stop it. They wanted to keep it going. And you're paying for it. Now you see what's happening in this country? You're getting screwed by your own government. And you put that man in office. Boy, don't you feel smart now?
Work permits. The plan would allow bypassing proof of education, previous employment, and English proficiency. The department says it would waive the usual requirements by creating temporary positions with transitional titles while they obtain the required credentials. The Los Angeles Sheriff's Department announced that hundreds of people were arrested during a
system to gain entry to the United States, and they're also working through numerous NGOs and nonprofits as part of these operations, which your tax dollars are also financing directly. We will talk about it. First off, let me show you this. This is Todd Bensman, Senior Fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies, explaining on Fox News how the United Nations is involved in running the border crisis.
The United Nations, it turns out, is spending hundreds of millions of dollars in cash handouts, food, shelter, something called humanitarian transportation, really every human need that is required to make the long journey through Latin America, Central America, and Mexico. And who pays the UN? Who's the UN's major funder? It's the U.S. taxpayer that is paying for this.
Now, remember one of the other big accusations coming out. They're getting
and Hillary Clinton is helping.
We're giving them money, or we're not giving them money. The United Nations is using our money. And, of course, the fake news media said that is fake news, fact check, false. Turns out, yes, they're getting prepaid credit cards and cash envelopes, and they're giving these to the illegal aliens, and that's your tax dollars hard at work, folks. New York Post had this. The United Nations just released the 2024 Interagency Coordination Platform for Refugees and Migrants from Venezuela. Remember, this is just about Venezuela. It's bigger than this, so keep in mind, this is just a small piece. And it notes that a planning and budget document for handing out $1.6 billion in 17 Latin American countries, and it confirms, finally, that the United Nations, with the helping hands of 248 named non-governmental organizations, the NGOs, is indeed giving debit cards to illegal migrants, funded in large part by U.S. taxpayers. We're paying their travel fees. We are giving them money, and we're not being told we're doing it. And notes that despite the R4V plan, this is the document from the United Nations, titled naming Venezuelans as recipients of this aid operation, the document's fine print, The footnote, page 14, paragraph page 43, for instance, says the largesse goes to all nationalities and multiple other nationalities. And notes further in a nutshell, the United Nations and its advocacy partners want to spread $372 million in cash and voucher assistance and multi-purpose cash assistance to 624,300 immigrants who in transit to the United States during 2024. And notes that money is most often handed out, other UN documents show, as prepaid rechargeable debit cards, but also hard cash in envelopes, bank transfers, and mobile transfers the U.S. border-bound travelers can use for whatever they want. Now, remember, folks, I said this in a special feature just a couple years ago. We've been saying this for a long time right here on Crossroads. We were criticized for it. We were called fake news for it. We were accused of spreading disinformation. And guess what? All of it is true. Every single thing we've been talking about has
just
now
like
been
Hunter's
proven
laptop.
true. And of course, look, I mean, I was at the U.S.-Mexico border. I was on the Mexico side. You can look at the ground, and it's covered with people's discarded ID cards, travel papers with United Nations markings on them, bus tickets, plane tickets, and yes, these prepaid debit cards that they're handing out to the illegal aliens. Now, this article continues, noting this is only one part of much broader UN hemisphere-wide vision that aims to spend $1.59 billion assisting about 3 million people in 17 countries who immigrated from home nations. And keep in mind, that's just their budget for the coming year. That's just their budget for the coming year. And it's worse than this, actually. There were reports coming out because this is about trafficking them to the U.S. United Nations using your tax money, financing all these NGOs, giving cash payments for people to come and illegally enter the United States. They're facilitating it. They're paying for it. They're awarding these people for violating U.S. law. And then once they get here, there's new reports coming out, for example, in Chicago, that the illegal aliens are getting $9,000 a month, at least around that, for various purposes, including, for example, with housing vouchers. Now, back to this story, though. It's been making rounds, folks. The news that the United Nations is running the border crisis using money paid for by U.S. taxpayer dollars. This is no longer just something you're going to hear. Maybe I think we were some of the only folks talking about it for a long time. There's a few other sources, but not broadly, right? This was not like something you'd see plastered all over the mainstream media. This is now out there. This is now being better understood, and people are finally reporting on it. Now, part of this is being exposed because the United Nations, well, just outright revealed the programs in its 2024 budget, and people noticed. The document explains how the United Nations has been giving out cash and other forms of assistance to, yes, facilitate mass illegal immigration into the U.S. And look, many of you might remember we exposed a few years back the special feature that I did, and that was called Border Deception. And we detailed as well how the United Nations is running these operations, one of the main branches being the IOM, International Organization for Migration, how it was paying all of the illegal immigrants along the way, and yes, we exposed how U.S. taxpayer dollars were a main source for all of it. And you might also remember, again, one of the main United Nations organizations we exposed in particular, which is, again, the International Organization for Migration, or IOM. And remember this name because you're going to be hearing it a lot more now. The IOM is also finally now being outed. Zero Hedge said this. Meet Amy Pope, an open borders advocate, Obama apologetic, and an accomplice of DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. As the UN's Deputy Secretary of the International Organization of Migration, IOM, the preeminent NGO in the field of migration, she plays an integral role in the illegal alien surge at our southern border. Further in, it states, Her coronation occurred at the United Nations 87th Assembly, meeting with world leaders on human mobility, quote unquote, to harness the power of migration, quote unquote, where migration is a powerful driver to fulfill the UN's Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development Goals. Remember, the United Nations has Agenda 2030, and that includes 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the socialist wish list of all the things they want to change in the world. And they're saying that they need illegal immigrants to do it. They need to bring, it seems, the entire southern hemisphere of the world and flood it into the northern hemisphere, almost entirely into the United States, maybe Canada, and of course into Western Europe. Now, this woman who's the head of the IOM, she's proud to be moving tens of millions of people, it says, from their land of origin to destabilize Western host nations. It notes that IOM aims to work closely with governments and other United Nations agencies to enable resettlement. To achieve that goal, it provides migrants with cash-based interventions, supplies, and transit assistance, in addition to coordinating and managing UN way stations like Lajas Blancas and Bajo Chiquito camps in Panama. And notes that because of unprecedented migration, Pope's bold strategic plan is increasing the 2024 budget to $7.9 billion, nearly a threefold increase over the 2023 budget. Are you getting that?
And it's coming out of your pocket.
3 times as much money to carry out these operations this coming year, the one we're in right now, as they did last year. And that could possibly mean we're going to see these operations grow threefold right ahead of the American presidential election. And notes further in, we can be sure that the State Department will help fill that void, because as it's coming out now, the State Department is financing these operations using our money. Now again, you might be wondering, where's all that money coming from? Well, we now have the answer. Our tax dollars. It turns out they've been shelling it out to pay for the invasion of the United States. And of course, folks, I'll be revealing more on this and talking about the U.S. border crisis and how it's just a giant fake charade. They're pretending to secure the border. They're pretending to deport people. They're playing this big game, and they're not telling you what's actually happening. Behind the scenes with it, they're funding it. Behind the scenes with it, they're working hand in hand with the United Nations to carry it out. Behind the scenes, they have used Border Patrol and repurposed it into an organization to just process this flooding. Has spent about $20 billion on refugee assistance for these illegal aliens. Open the Books have this. It said, our auditors at openthebooks.com looked at just one federal office to get an idea of how much spending is going towards accommodating, transporting, and providing migrants with various other services. And also the Office of Refugee Resettlement, ORR, which is a part of Health and Human Services. Again, this is a branch of the U.S. government. They are carrying out a lot of this, and it says that they're a major vehicle for migrant-related spending. Now, how much money are they getting to help facilitate the illegal migration into the United States? Well, it says Congress appropriated $20 billion in just 2 years on refugee and entrant assistance. Are you getting that, folks? $20 billion specifically for refugee and entrant assistance. And remember, they're giving all these illegal aliens refugee status, or at least they're on the waiting list for it. It says that last year they published an oversight report on the unaccompanied children program, also run by this agency. It says up to 85,000 minors were lost, meaning they disappeared, after sponsorship with a vetted guardian. Now, the technicality of that is this. The Biden administration, they have separate camps for all the illegal alien children, people, kids who don't have adults with them. And they have a program where an adult can come in and say, I'll take 10, I'll take 15, I'll take 20 children. And, of course, they give them over to these adults. It turns out that some of the houses of the adults they were giving these children to included vacant lots, including houses with multiple, 20 kids in them. And of course, nothing to prove these individuals are in any way related to the kids, nothing, no follow-up seeing whether the kids are okay, nothing making sure the kids are not being sex trafficked or enslaved or whatever else. In fact, not only that, but if they make 2 phone calls and they don't get a response, they just give up. And the child is deemed lost. They're deemed to be just disappeared. Now, notes further in that the New York Times, of all places, found credible allegations of child labor law violations, and congressional whistleblowers also detailed large-scale trafficking. That was last year, right? It says that now our investigation into the agency reveals new oversight. 1, billion-dollar spending spikes in the adult refugee programs, and 2, potential conflicts of interest between agency leadership and its largest grant recipients, and that in fact, for decades, agency director Robin Dunn Marcos was employed in executive positions by 2 nonprofit organizations that are among the agency's largest grantees. I should note as well that Alejandro Mayorkas is also being accused of being tied in with one of the Hebrew resettlement organizations, which is one of the largest nonprofits carrying out this illegal, mass migration into the U.S. Now, remember also, we're talking about one government office, and this one U.S. government office had $20 billion in 2 years of your tax money that they're spending to flood this country in a foreign invasion. And again, that's through the Office of Refugee Resettlement under the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, as I exposed in my investigation of the border a while back, a lot of the money to IOM under the United Nations is coming through the U.S. State Department. And so I should note, they're talking about HHS is $20 billion, right, for this. Remember, the U.S. State Department is also giving them a whole lot of money. And so we don't really know the full amount. The money that we're being told about does not include as well what states are having to spend to house and feed and take care of all the illegal aliens. In Chicago, now I mentioned that there's a report coming out, they're claiming that about $9,000 is being given to the illegal aliens individually each month for housing, childcare, food, and everything else. And note as well, this $20 billion in this one report does also not include the hospital costs. And remember that illegal immigrants, they game the hospital system for free health care, because in the U.S., hospitals cannot legally turn people away. And if you're not on the books, there's no way to hold a person financially accountable for any medical costs. And grants from government agencies. In other words, close to 50% of their money is coming from our own government or government agencies in general, and the majority of that money was coming from the State Department. Meaning, yes, as I said many times, the State Department is funding this. But some of this, it notes, also comes from the Department of Homeland Security to this individual organization, which can bring about some problems given that Mayorkas may have some ties to it. It notes this is according to the group's tax filings and to other sources, with the balance coming from a mix of major corporate sponsors and other sources. Further, it states that UN budget documents, United Nations, federal grant tracking databases, and other public sources show that the State Departments, PRM and USAID, also have poured taxpayer money into at least the other religion-oriented NGOs that CIS, this Center for Immigration Studies, selected for examination, including Catholic organizations, Lutheran organizations, and Seventh-day Adventist groups. It says the list of participating NGOs comes from the UN's 2023 to 2024 Regional Refugee and Migrant Response Plan, which lists more than 200 of these groups, notably on page 268 of that document, if you want to have a look. It says the Center for Immigration Studies has exported that list in this report, which you can find as well if you want. And notes that another 20 NGO groups signed on for the coming year, 2024, meaning this is getting larger, because remember also there's a threefold increase in the budget for the United Nations side of it through the IOM. It notes that these groups, these new 20, are not yet being identified. But The State Department, it says, and USAID also sent historic volumes of cash to the Latin American project's main United Nations overseer, which also passed that aid straight to migrants. And now remember, we talked about IOM. There's also the other one, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, as well as, of course, the IOM. It says the State Department's PRM has given IOM, International Organization for Migration at the UN, $1.4 billion in just the last 12 months, by far the most on record, according to usaspending.gov, a database that tracks federal spending. And folks, we've been telling you all this for a good while now. Again, the special feature, border deception, if you watch that special feature and you see me surprised, it's because you're watching me in the process of uncovering this. Legitimately, I did not know about this before I set out to investigate it. When I was on the ground in Texas and touring the border and went to the Mexico side, I was coming to understand and uncover this. And of course, when we went to the Mexico side, we started finding all the United Nations documents on the ground. We were shocked. It was not publicly disclosed